Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Doctors and Dollars podcast, where we discuss health insights and wealth secrets. I'm your host, Nate Crannell, joined today by Dr. Nirav Shah. Dr. Shah is a leader in analytics, informatics, digital health, quality, and innovation, having written dozens of transcripts on those topics while working on numerous cutting-edge projects to transform healthcare. He's currently the medical director of quality innovation, as well as the director of infectious disease at North Shore University Health Systems in Chicago. His North Star is leveraging technology to improve outcomes, reduce costs, while improving patient and provider experience. Welcome to Doctors and Dollars, Nirav.
Thank you, Nate. Really appreciate being on.
You bet. What's going well today?
What's going well today? Working from home, so allowed me to work out a few times, which I typically don't get to do. But it was a nice day because of that.
Nice. Yeah, we talked on offline. You're not doing as much physicianing anymore. You've gotten more into the data and kind of the business side of healthcare, which obviously allows you to work from home. Is that something that you've always wanted to do, or was that just kind of fell in your lap and it progressed from there?
It fell in my lap. So I'm an infectious disease physician by training. So I spend about 20% of my time doing that. But back when I was training for infectious disease, I thought I was going to do global health. And that doesn't really, it's not consistent with having a family life in the US with, I met my wife, and on the first date, I told her I was going to do Doctors Without Borders and I was going to be in some foreign country. And she's like, how is that consistent with the dating life? And I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I basically ripped up my application right on the spot because I was about to like submit it. And I was like, okay, this is not for me.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a choose one or the other, but like, hey, kudos to you for wanting to do Doctors and Dollars. But if you really like me, let's rethink this.
Yeah, basically. So then
Yeah.
then she was in tech, so that inspired me to kind of think about technology, analytics, and that I kind of got into that space then, just by developing that interest and then finding mentors in the space that helped me get into this.
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily an interest that you developed, like, because you went to Northwestern, right? It looked like, as far as undergrad and medical school, did you have an interest in tech and innovation at that point, and then you just happened to meet your wife who was in that field, or did that just
No.
your wife kind of influenced you?
Yeah, I mean, I was a biology and econ major, and the econ that I was interested in was developmental econ. So that's
Hmm.
why I got a master's in public health, and I went into infectious disease, and I thought I was going to go abroad and work on things that influenced and impacted tons of people, that could really benefit from this. And I had no interest in innovation at that moment, or tech. So this was something that's really developed with my wife and her tech journey. Just kind of listening in, and it got me very interested in this space. And I, thought that this could be an interesting opportunity.
For sure. Well, thinking back, as you were in college, you and I are about the same age, and so the big thing, and maybe this was one of the catalysts that progressed your going through medical school, but like Ebola was a huge thing back when we were younger. Was that something where you thought, hey, I'm gonna go over to Africa and the Middle East and take care of this thing?
So I watched the movie Outbreak, and it's
Amazing movie.
yes, it scared me completely. And I think that movie really had an impact on my life, in that, I thought that that was so interesting that a disease like that could cause so many repercussions.
Hmm.
The fact that it was what we call zoonotic infection, so it came from a monkey. There was no history of that, previously. Then all of a sudden, this new disease that comes, and the specific physicians trying to figure out how to treat this. I thought it was fascinating. And I think that really impacted my decision to go into global health and infectious disease.
Yeah. Did you watch that like in eighth grade science class, like I did? That was like a movie day on a Friday. They're like, yeah, hey, we're gonna watch this movie. Let's not to scare you guys or anything, but what a great movie. Dustin Hoffman just crushes it in that one.
Yeah, I think I was home alone watching it by myself and had a nightmare for like a week after that. I was like, we're all going to die.
You're like, oh, my love of monkeys is gone, but my love of infectious diseases has gone up.
Yep. Yeah.
What aside from Ebola and uh just the origin of that and where that comes from, what are some of these other diseases that are out there that are like that, that there's kind of that initial host that just all of a sudden is a global news story? I think of E. coli as one, but I mean, I'm sure there's others that are on your mind.
Not, yeah, not so much E. coli, but COVID. I mean, so we just had this pandemic, and
Mm-hmm.
the source was probably a bat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say probably, generally, there's a lot of coronaviruses that are in bats. There's a lot of other things that we think about. So, like West Nile, Zika, these are all kind of
Mm-hmm.
things that didn't exist. And then there was a crossover event where something that typically infects animals then crosses over and then starts affecting humans, and you start seeing that. So, I mean, those are the big ones that would probably be in the public's mind. Also, there's always a concern that influenza that is infecting birds or pigs will cross over and cause like a pandemic strain of influenza. And then we've now seen three pandemic type coronavirus infections. So the original SARS, MERS, and then what we call SARS-CoV-2, which is COVID. So these are three just in our lifespan where you have these crossover events with coronavirus. So these are like some of the big ones that probably will be in the public consciousness.
So, and this is my naiveness coming out, but also curiosity, like a crossover event. So, I don't remember the name of the virus that was in Outbreak, but I mean, you've mentioned SARS, the Zika virus, those types of things. What is that event? Is it a disease that is typically only found in animals based on their DNA and genetics, and something is introduced into them that then creates a Zika virus, for example? How's that work?
I mean, so when a human comes in close contact with, say, a bat,
Mhm.
some of those virus particles can come and essentially replicate in a human, essentially kind of contaminate or infect a human. A lot of those things frequently don't have the proteins. So a virus is essentially some form of DNA or RNA that then transcribes proteins, and those proteins are allow it to create symptoms, cause severity of illness, basically replicate, and then infect other humans. So sometimes the machinery is not quite there to infect humans. Sometimes you can infect humans and you don't really produce symptoms. Sometimes you can't replicate. So you have to have the right conditions for that. If that virus has to have the right kind of infrastructure, essentially, to create something like this that can turn into a global pandemic. And so it's rare for all of those things to happen. But the crossover event is essentially when you essentially have a virus from an animal that then leaps into a host that it typically doesn't infect, causing that type of infection and reproduction and you know dissemination or contagion.
So truly it's a situation where there's just a perfect storm of events that just allow that disease to grow and to flourish. I think of things like mold. Like mold won't grow on, stainless steel because it's not an organic matter, right? It doesn't have the airflow and the food to grow. Same thing with the disease. It truly needs all of the perfect the recipe, right, for it to
Yeah,
truly expand. What then what takes it from a localized, let's talk about COVID. I mean, that's the one that most of the listeners are going to be familiar with, right?
yeah.
How that was so localized at the beginning, right? Let's call it fall of 2019, and then it just spread. Is that just a lack of containment, simply because they just didn't have all the pieces in place, or was it wasn't, people weren't showing symptoms, so there just wasn't the knowingness of it? Like, what took it from such the Wuhan, China, very small area, to now everybody on every continent is getting it?
The asymptomatic spread
Mm-hmm.
was the thing. So I think you hit on it. I mean, if you think about what happened with SARS and MERS, patients that develop patients that were infected with that developed symptoms. So you could quarantine them, you can quarantine contacts. And so there is public health measures to basically contain these types of infections. And that's why, even though SARS spread quite a bit, it was, essentially a global pandemic, it was stopped. The problem here was you can infect people who then are asymptomatic. And so then you have no idea. I mean, the only way you could really contain it is what they did in China, which is, you have to have significant infrastructure where you basically shut down an entire area. You test everybody, shut down an entire area. And that's the only way you're going to get that kind of transmission to stop. And so we were not conditioned to do stuff like that at the beginning of the pandemic, right? It took China some time to do it. And the US, we would never be able to do anything like that, right? It requires, a country that the government has the ability to do stuff like that for them to shut it down.
Yeah. Um, and I think the underlying thing you're saying, like there's that communist aspect of it where they can create hey, we are shutting everything down. If you're a business owner, shut your doors. Nobody's doing anything until we can, kind of let this all flush out. Which, I mean, they're one of the largest economies. I don't remember a lot of news, I guess, hearing about how their economy was impacted by it. I'm sure it was, but if they were able to just do 100% lockdown for 2-3 weeks, I mean, they would probably be able to ramp back up. Whereas the United States, it was definitely major cities were kind of first, and then it just slowly. I mean, there's a lot of places. I mean, we live here in the Midwest. I grew up in a small town in Western Iowa where I don't even think that they thought that COVID really happened.
Right.
Just because it is such a small community, there's not a lot around. Good, bad, or otherwise. I mean, it was just one of those things where I don't, unless it was a major metro, it wasn't taken as seriously as maybe China would have taken it. Just knowing, I mean, their population is drastically different than ours, and most of it, I believe, is in major cities. So they would have been impacted by it at a lot greater force than, let's say, rural America, in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, it is a challenge for every country. Every country is different. Everyone kind of addressed it differently. And I mean, it was a major life-changing event. Everyone's going to know where they were when the news
Absolutely.
came that we're locking down, or there's something that has spread, from China to Italy, from Italy to New York. Everyone will remember. I don't know, maybe people won't remember and they've blocked it out, but generally this will be, yeah, I mean, this was a big event.
Do you regret not investing money into Zoom when you found out about the pandemic?
I did not, I did
Think
not,
about it.
yeah, I mean, I did not do any of the pandemic plays. There was quite a few of them that did really well and then have now come back to, come back to Earth, after they were in the stratosphere. Did not do that. And I tend not to kind of follow the flavor of the week in my
Sure.
investing.
Gotcha. You're kind of the steady turtle in the race. You're going to get there till the end.
Yeah.
Don't take too much risk.
I take risk, but um, when you start when you start doing things that are the flavor of the week, it's all about timing. And I am probably the worst at timing stuff. So with enough experience in not being able to time things correctly, I know that is just a way to lose money if you're not kind of following it, very closely, and if you don't have the right emotional acumen, to decide
Yeah.
when to jump in or when to jump out.
It's 100% emotion. I mean, when I was a financial advisor, I always told people it's not timing of the market, it's your time in the market.
Right.
The more that you can dollar cost average and put dollars in consistently and just stay in the market and ride the wave, you're going to see much greater success than, yeah, if you're trying to jump into NFTs or the next big
Yeah.
cryptocurrency comes out. Zoom kind of came out of nowhere. I joked about that because you said everyone's going to remember where they were when, it was what, mid-March. I don't remember the exact day, but
Yeah.
I just remember getting the email from our network office saying, "Hey, starting tomorrow, nobody comes into the office. You need to all work from home." And I had maybe been on 5 Zoom meetings in my entire life. I was like,
Right.
I'd heard of Zoom, but just didn't know what it was. And all of a sudden I'm downloading it on my computer and starting to schedule client meetings through it. And I'm like, man, I don't know if my business is going to stay afloat. But
Yeah.
we prospered. Obviously the market did well at the end of the summer in 2020. So that was a big plus there, I guess. But yeah, I won't forget. So I'm sure you were right in the thick of things, doing something major when it happened.
Yeah. So I'm a rare infectious disease doctor that didn't take care of COVID patients.
Mm,
Um, and because I do so little clinical, we had a dedicated team. So we actually, so at the time, um, we were 4 hospitals, and because we were seeing all the incredible strains on hospitals that were occurring kind of across the world, what we basically did was we cohorted all our COVID patients in one of our 4 hospitals.
mm,
And so then we had a dedicated infectious disease team, like 4 of us, that basically were there all the time managing the COVID patients. And then there was a team that did the non-COVID patients. So I was doing the non-COVID work when I was on clinical service, but I got into a lot of research related activities because at the time there were no treatments. And the only way that health systems were getting access to treatments were if they participated in clinical trials with pharmaceutical companies. And so we didn't
mm,
have that infrastructure. And so I helped to set up um, a lot of the IT infrastructure to allow a lot of my colleagues who are not in infectious disease to participate in these trials. And I slowly got involved in those trials. And with that, then as a kind of like as a side hobby, I ended up creating a really robust research team around clinical trials. And so now we're one of the highest grossing I'm one of the highest grossing researchers at our institution because of all these clinical trials that I just got into by chance. So that deviates from the technology and the IT and the innovation, but it was a very interesting space and something where, it could benefit our patients. So that's how I got into that.
very cool. So kind of the birth of something new that came from something bad, right? Like what you what you did at that time and all the research and being able to influence clinical trials and things like that would have never come about had we not had the pandemic. So uh, very
That
neat
was,
that
yeah,
yeah.
one silver lining um, for my research, and also now we have a team in place where if something else comes up, we have the infrastructure in place to get therapeutics to our community members through clinical trials, and that's generally how these things work. Because
Mhm,
infectious disease, new stuff pops up all the time.
mhm, for sure. So I know, actually, I shouldn't say I know. I'm what I think I know, and I want you as the expert to correct me. But most clinical trials for a new drug or a new vaccine that come out typically is that like 10 years. They have to go through multiple years of trials, right? Before they get approved. We've had other diseases, cancers, things that have been around forever that we haven't been able to find that cure solution for. As COVID hit, there's really, I think, what, 3 big pharmaceutical companies who had, that created a vaccine. What did that clinical trial process look like for them to go from nothing to like 7 months later? We've got 3 options, I guess, on the menu of what you want to get from a vaccine standpoint for COVID.
Yeah. So there has been uh, there's been a tremendous amount of work looking at this mRNA platform. And if you remember the Nobel Prize that just went out, it was to 2 researchers
Hmm.
who actually believed in the mRNA platform as the way to potentially deploy things very quickly. And this has only come about because of mapping of the human genome and understanding kind
Hmm.
of how this all works. And so that concept has existed for some time. And then the other piece to this was we had the SARS epidemic or the SARS pandemic. And at that time, pharmaceutical companies started getting started gearing up for developing vaccines. And so the spike protein, which is the same protein that we have for, COVID, they started working on that and started targeting that and started thinking about that. And so there was ongoing work that really kind of built the infrastructure and the foundation that enabled when this, I mean, if you remember, as soon as this came out, there's some news that it got sequenced immediately and it got put on, the web and everybody had access to it. So then it's basically that was the recipe, the protein that this vaccine was going to target. We already knew what protein it's going to target. And then we knew the structure. So with this mRNA platform, you were able to essentially create the vaccine very quickly. And then a lot of the time, and then we were lucky that a lot of the regulatory, I mean, imagine this earth-shattering moment where everybody is focused on one thing, right?
Yep.
And that's literally what happened. And so all the research processes that normally take years and years and years, everything got condensed. The clinical trials, like the speed at which this was required, everybody was interested in that vaccine. So it doesn't take, a tremendous amount of time to cajole people to come into these clinical trials. Everybody wanted in, right? And then they were able to determine the effectiveness of the vaccine because people kept getting sick, right? So there are, it's not like this disease process that may occur in like 5 years or 10 years, and you have to try to understand the effectiveness. This was happening on a day-to-day basis. Everybody was, getting infected. So it was like the aligning of a lot of things that occurred that allowed for that time frame to be shortened considerably. And there's been tremendous work in the ID community. There's this group called CEPI that has been figuring out how do we shorten the time frame, if something like this happens. And I just went to our, I would say, national/international ID conference, and one of the talks that I went to was people are actively thinking. I mean, one of the leaders in this space was like, the next one is going to come. It's just a matter of time. And so they've built essentially a consortia to think through how do we build a vaccine that targets all coronaviruses. So not
Okay.
just this specific one, but a general vaccine. And so they've also been talking about general influenza vaccines. This is now, how do we create a general coronavirus vaccine? So the next one that comes, we have something ready to go. Or we could immunize our, people in advance so that it's not as deadly and it's not like, it doesn't turn the world upside down.
For sure. So, and I don't want to, I hate using phrases over and over again, but the perfect storm again kind of happened in the sense of the legwork had been built before coronavirus even came. Or, I mean, coronavirus has always been around for a long time, but COVID-19 in particular, there had already been legwork because of SARS that had been built and mapped out. You get that along with people start becoming more accepting of the mRNA platform. I think it was are they Swiss doctors who I'm trying to think where they were from, but
Oh, yeah. The two that you mean that won the Nobel Prize?
yeah.
One is out of University of Pennsylvania, and then I forgot the female whose idea. She was the one really pushing for this. I don't know I don't know the nationalities. I mean, they
Okay.
both might be American. They might be Swiss.
Oh, see,
I'm not.
I thought they were in like a European research facility. Maybe I was wrong, but it was kind of the perfect storm of like, hey, we already had the SARS thing figured out. We have the mRNA acceptance, and then it was just because other diseases take time and you have to almost wait for people to get it and then want to be in the clinical trials to be able to gather data. You're getting it every single day. You're getting new and new data. And so you can take 5 years of clinical trials and compress it into 5 months,
Yeah.
just because of the volume of people. So that's good insight that I wouldn't have known before. I don't watch the news a ton. I don't know. Mainstream media is just, to me, is they all
Yeah.
they
This is
all
not
say
in the
the
news.
same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is
it's not
not
in the
in the
news.
news. Yeah.
Yeah, so that
This
that
is
should be because
this is like in the ID conference type world, where it's like where I mean, I remember a lecture that was given at a prior ID conference where they were literally talking about speeding up vaccines so that if something like this happens, we don't take 10 years. So this has been top of mind for a lot of the epidemiologists and vaccine developers, around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I just feel like mainstream media they all talk about the same thing. They all have the same narrative, right? That you can even see videos where they're saying like the exact same script. And so it's like whatever's easiest and whatever makes the general public feel comfortable, I think is where they go for. Whereas you go to an ID conference and I mean, you guys are, that's the front lines, the first thing that's happening. So that makes sense. So that's good insight there. I think what it really comes down to is there the belief before that the 5 years, 7 years, 10 years of clinical trials that all the vaccines in the past have gone through, is there kind of just the belief now like, man, we were just taking way too long. Like that process was way too long anyway, and we just needed a way to shorten that up, and this gives us the opportunity and be able to create the technology to now shorten it up like we thought it should have been even before COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 10 years, we've definitely been, and I apologize for the background noise.
Oh, I don't hear anything. You're good.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's something that's been, top of mind for infectious disease docs is like, how do we shorten this? How do we, instead of doing a lot of things sequentially, how do we do it, in parallel? So this has been kind of top of mind, and a tremendous amount of energy went into getting this right, and doing this as quickly as possible, given just how many
Mhm.
people were dying. So it's kind of it's an amazing story, one that I know maybe there's a lot of political stuff around this, but the story
Mhm.
itself, there's a reason why they got the Nobel Prize, for this technology.
For sure. Let's keep on the same thought of technological advancements. As we think about AI, is really starting to grow. I was listening to a podcast the other day, Joe Rogan and Sam Altman, the guy that OpenAI, Chat GPT is all the rage right now. Really interesting conversation between those two. But one thing that they talked about, as it relates to diseases, is that how can AI, and I guess this would be my question for you. Do you think AI at some point in the future will be able to reduce risk or even eradicate certain diseases through ways of, like, let's say Neuralink, Elon Musk's Neuralink that he wants to hope everyone puts into their brain, right? And obviously there's going to be a lot of pushback, but let's say Neuralink comes in. One of the use cases that Elon Musk hoped to get out of that is that through that programming we can essentially remove disease from the body through that. Do you see that ever happening in the future? Is it completely off the wall that that could even happen? What are your thoughts around that? Hey everyone, I wanted to take a moment to talk about what I do outside of being the host of the Doctors and Dollars podcast. I'm the CFO of Grand Vision Capital Group. At Grand Vision, we work with high income earners who make a great living but still can't quite break through that true wealth ceiling. We utilize strategically chosen investments tailored for high income earners. The question always at the forefront of our minds is why wait for retirement to finally live when you can implement an investment strategy that will impact your life today? To be honest, most of the people we work with never even knew these options existed because their financial planner doesn't have access to these exclusive investments. So, if you're ready to finally turn your high income into real wealth, visit our website, www.grandvision.co, and hit the Take Action button in the top right corner to schedule some time with me. Or even better, connect, follow me on any of my social media accounts, shoot me a message. Now, back to the show.
So I'm not as familiar with like Neuralink removing diseases, but I
Mhm.
will say that AI, the potential in life sciences is significant. And there have already been specific use cases that have transformed how we think about disease processes. So there, DeepMind, which got bought out by Google, it was a UK
Mhm.
shop before that. They were the ones that created like AlphaGo, and they're trying to. I think they were trying to beat Kasparov in chess, and then they moved to Go, which is a more complex problem. The thing that they did after that was they figured out how proteins fold, and it's something called AlphaFold. And so they created a system and it's an AI system that allows this AI system to predict based on uh, a genetic sequence how a protein will fold. And before, what happened was it took like a PhD student, a poor PhD student or postdoc, like forever to be able to determine how a single protein could theoretically fold, right? And tons of
Mm.
tests and all that kind of stuff. And so there's multiple iterations to this AlphaFold, and they eventually figured it out. And and now any PhD student or postdoc or investigator can now use this to, if they have a genetic sequence, to figure out how a protein will fold with extreme accuracy. And it's things like this where, and that's just one example, like,
Mhm.
and understanding how DNA forms into a protein is extremely important for how we think about disease processes for a variety of different ways. And that computational skill, that computational ability that AI provides in prediction and all of this for things that we don't know how to characterize, but that we have to study for prolonged periods of time,
Yeah.
that's where it's going to become extremely valuable. And from a life science standpoint, in trying to determine how to think through really complex diseases that are based on a lot of different things, like how how is that disease state, why is that disease state being expressed, and is there a way to kind of fix that? I mean, the opportunities are endless if we think about this.
Where do you see AI being a problem in healthcare as far as it tries to get integrated into certain areas of healthcare where it becomes more of a burden than just having a human doing that role? One thing I think about is like radiology or somebody looking at an x-ray. This was an example I talked to someone about the other day. Today it's, take an x-ray by an x-ray tech, doctor looks at it, finds the issue. Do you foresee something where jobs are lost at some point, where it's like a nurse presses a button, takes the x-ray, they plug it into AI finds it, and then gives the next mode of treatment to the doctor. The doctor just simply becomes then the mouthpiece to explain that.
There's a lot to this question.
Yeah.
I think with all things technology, and we've seen this through the history of humans, technology may displace certain workers, but then it creates, new jobs for other types of workers.
Well
Um,
said. Yeah.
the There is a high likelihood that the nature of being a physician will change as this technology is adopted and disseminated. um, I remember there's this book by this physician out of Scripps. His name is Eric Topol. He's kind of a thought leader in this space. And he kind of, a few years back, before this whole generative AI piece, basically said that physicians that use AI are, the way that they're going to use it is to work at top of license and essentially allow them to do the things that they really got into medicine to do, which is to do the human part of this, right? The emotional, like being there to hold someone's hand and kind of navigating someone through something, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
AI would be there to help us with all these things, like whether it's the administrative stuff or, a variety of other things. It would help surface issues in the chart that we could then help to better diagnose. But that's essentially, or like a radiologist would then, be more interested in doing procedures as opposed to, like, reading, thousands and thousands of x-rays, which I thought was interesting. So it's like the humanism comes back. And
Mm-hmm.
then there was a really interesting paper that came out, and it was a study where they looked at physician responses against a generative AI response. And this was not done in a clinical setting. It was done, I think, on Reddit or something like that.
Sure.
And they compared, like, is the human physician more empathetic than the generative AI doc in a box kind of physician, in terms of the advice. And they actually found that the generative AI responses were more empathetic as well. So it's like,
What?
when we Yeah, which I was like, I'm not surprised. I can see how physicians can be very curt in their responses and not as empathetic because they have millions of things that they need to do, right? And they're not going to craft a, 6-page long empathetic answer, to
Hmm.
see how you're feeling. And, they'll just be like, yes, you know. So, so even that space, there is, a risk of humans and physicians being kind of taken over from that standpoint as well. At least from an empathy standpoint, which I thought was an interesting article. So I mean, anything is fair game in the future. And to get to your initial questions, like what are the risks of this? So the big
Hmm.
problem with AI is there's two: garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you have training data that only looks at certain things, then you and it's not good data, then you're not going to get a good outcome and a good prediction. Or if you're putting into an AI system x-rays that just look at pneumonia, you're not going, it's going to say everything looks like pneumonia. It's not going to tell you that something else, like some edge case, it might tell you it's pneumonia and may be inaccurate. And then there's the whole component of of like a black box, where if you don't understand how these algorithms work and it starts pushing out certain recommendations that are not correct, you can lose trust in the system. And so adoption of stuff like this may be affected. When potentially an AI solution is a good solution, you may have frontline clinicians who don't accept it, and that uptake is not fully utilized. So I think these are some of the things, like, it's the bias, the ability for us to have good training data sets, and then how things are more moving, in this direction of black boxes that inexplainability. So, and I think you're on mute.
Yep. Sorry to clear my throat. Uh, so I think you're right. The impact is that if the garbage in, not necessarily garbage, but just the input in comes from humans, an output is given. Let's say the output is correct, then you have the human element of pride, right? You're going to have a physician that just gets an output from the AI and they're just like, nah, I just really don't think that's it. And then the use of the AI was not relevant in that sense. So yeah, I definitely can see how the human aspect of it. And I was really surprised by your answer saying that AI was more empathetic in the response. To me, as you said that, then my first thought was, well, now I could see doctors kind of offshoring that need to be empathetic. You're right. They got 100 things that they got to do. It's like, all right, well, I've made the decision. Here's what the next steps are. I've made my, professional opinion. They just plug that into AI and say, hey, AI, just give me an empathetic response, and then I'll just send it to the patient. And so they'll feel
That's
like,
happening. Yes,
yeah,
that's happening.
yeah,
There's a lot of the electronic health record vendors are partnering with generative AI companies to figure out how to pre-write an inbox message. So a
mhm,
message where patients, when you send a message to your doctor through whatever patient portal you have,
mhm.
in the future, that's going to be all scripted by generative AI with the doc just evaluating it, making sure it's okay before it gets sent out.
For sure. I use the same thing. I mean, I use Chat GPT to say, hey, I have an idea for a type of promotion or an Instagram reel that I want to put out. I have the idea that's 3 sentences, but that's not quite enough. And you plug it into AI and say, I want a 30-second Instagram reel. What's the best, most charismatic, and how can I word it? And it spits it out. It does a pretty good job. So I
Yeah.
can definitely see that that's something that a doctor who's got to see 4,000 patients in a year, they're going to sit down and talk to the ones that are more of the serious cases, but the day to day it could be taken over by AI, which, good or bad, I guess that might be okay. It might create um, some more streamlined processes within their clinic. It may create an opportunity to not have to go out and hire another staff person to do some of these things. They can just use AI for it. So I can see some positives there. One of the things that you spend a lot of your time doing is analytics. Talk to me about some of the technological advances. It doesn't have to be AI, but any of the technological advances that have happened, let's say in the last 5 years, when you've really focused more on analytics within the healthcare system. What are some of the big things that are happening right now that are allowing you to analyze a lot of the data around healthcare systems, prescriptions, things like that.
So again, I think this is an AI type question, because
Okay.
if you think about how much data there is in healthcare, I mean, it's significant.
Mm-hmm.
So even the notes that we write in our in our electronic health record. I think I saw just today. I think Microsoft put out that we are only using like 3% of our notes, of the insight and value from our notes, at some point after we write it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you think about imaging data, genetic data, wearables data, all of these things, there is no way to process that. There's no way, the trying to figure out what the signal is from the noise. Like if you just had someone processing that, it's impossible. So the analytic systems, current analytic systems and analytic systems of the future are really trying to figure out what's the signal from the noise from all of this vast data. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really where I think, from an analytic standpoint, we're going, is to make systems that are better able to capture that signal from the noise. And things are moving, not just like we're going to look at electronic health record data, or we're going to just look at imaging data. Pretty soon we're going to be looking at, they call it multimodal AI. So looking at different types of data. So imaging plus electronic health record data combined to kind of give a better prediction or a better response. And then if you add generative components to it, right? Imagine you do a video in an OR. An AI system is looking at that video. It knows what's going on in the patient's chart, so it's evaluated, electronic health record data, and it's able to make a recommendation on what you should do next for your surgery, and to provide that kind of AI assistance for the surgeon. So I mean, this is just,
Instantaneously while you're in the OR.
yeah. I mean, just to imagine, what is possible, right? So it's churning through all this data, having a large repository, and being able to make that prediction. It's kind of like AlphaFold that I mentioned, but
Mm-hmm.
then on steroids with all kinds of other data.
Who was let's go back 30 years. Who was this all on the physician then to look at the imagery, look at the, patient's health record, look at the some of those other data points that you just talked about, and then come to a conclusion in real time there? That this was all on the physician? Was this on, is there staff at hospitals and clinics that help a physician do that? Like, who was doing this before the technology was there?
Yeah, I mean, physicians used to do a lot of this as
Mm-hmm.
they were trying to assess and understand. Like, I mean, I remember some of my infectious disease colleagues would be doing microbiology related things for their patients, and doing that. I think there's a lot of just macro trends that have changed the way physicians are working, in the last 30 years. There's been some corporatization of medicine. There's been a lot of regulatory burden. So there's a lot of things that are keeping physicians away from doing a lot of the doctoring and investigation, and doing more of, the burdensome, like maybe low value type work. But AI has the ability to potentially reduce the amount of time that is spent on some of that, whether it's documenting in the note, or trying to assess, like, where do I need to close care gaps, and other things. So it that used to be how we practice. Things
Mm-hmm.
have changed, but hopefully, as we think about AI, we're able to gain some productivity in some of these low value tasks, to kind of go back to where it was that where we were, what we were doing, in the past.
Yeah, kind of offload some of those process improvements to artificial intelligence to be able to let them take those. And I mean, to your point earlier, to allow a physician to be more patient focused, have the one-on-one conversations, hold their hand. If some of the decision making and some of the analytics behind that is already done for them, they're not having to spend time, late hours. I'm sure physicians, you may have been one of them, even a decade ago before artificial intelligence became a lot more relevant, were working 70, 80 hours a week. And a lot of that could have been spent doing some of these analytics things that we're talking about. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, imagine you have a conversation with a patient, and after, when they come into your clinic, and as you're having that conversation, the note is getting dictated, in real time, with generative AI assessing kind of the conversation. We call it ambient AI. And then that AI system also tells you these are the orders that you need to place based on the patient's history and what you've documented. I mean, what your conversation that you had and what you said, and all the coding, the billing and the coding and all that, which is another component that we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's all like essentially taken care of, and you just have to agree to it. And it takes away all those steps. So all those things that we're dealing with right now is basically a click away from completion, as opposed to like entering in all these different things or typing up these notes. So I mean, that's probably going to happen sooner than we think.
Yeah, that's a big positive impact to a physician's life and to just the clinic operations on a day-to-day basis as well. That's a vast improvement. One of the things that you have focused on, I notice in some of the literature I've read about you, is prescriptive analytics. Tell me a little bit about that. That's
Yeah.
probably a broad
So
question, but give me kind of the Reader's Digest version of that, what that means.
I mean, so predictive analytics is you're making a prediction about something. Like, this is a high
Mhm.
risk patient. This is a patient that you should consider doing something, whatever it is. Prescriptive analytics is we're not only identifying it, but we're telling you that you should do X or Y or Z intervention so as to impact them and reduce their risk for whatever outcome it is that they have. So we built this system in our health system, which I didn't really mention. So it's North Shore Edward Elmhurst Health, and before we merged with Edward Elmhurst and we were at North Shore, we we essentially had predictions that were predicting risk of readmission, risk of death in the hospital, risk of death outside of the hospital. And we use this underlying algorithms to determine which patients should go to certain units, which patients should get additional interventions because they were considered high risk. And so there were clear prescriptions that were made based on the prediction that was happening.
Mm.
And so that's kind of and it was all built into the workflow. So the system was essentially this AI, I wouldn't call it an AI algorithm, but this, statistical model tied to these clinical decision support tools were essentially providing guidance to how we manage some of these patients.
And the input there is the patient's health record from the past, going back to when they're 5 years old and they, sprain their ankle, up into the point where they're in your clinic then, and that you've analyzed the entire health record to say, hey, based on past prescriptions and effects that have happened to them, you then leads to here's the next prescriptive, I guess, step to take.
Yeah, I
Is that fair
mean,
to say?
generally it was all electronic health record data, but it included past medical history, why they were coming in, labs, other demographic data, vital signs. So all of that stuff was going in to determine, how do we impact their care?
Yeah. So one of the last questions I want to ask is around analytics in general, because when I think of analysis or analytics, just being a former financial advisor, the thing I think about is like analyzing mutual funds and stock trends and things like that. How does analytics in healthcare and some of the things that we've already talked about compare to the analytics of the stock market? Because again, they're looking at past history and performance of a company and what they can predict, right? There's some predictive analytics that go into how do they think that's going to perform in the future. How, what are some of the similarities? What are some of the differences between analytics that you're dealing with versus, let's say, stock analytics? Are they very similar? Maybe they're similar.
I think they're quite similar. I mean,
Okay.
these are extremely complex systems,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there could be external, internal factors, right? Um, and predictions are not exact in both of these things. You only have like a confidence interval, or this is the likelihood that something like this is going to happen. The outcome for, the stock market may be a lot more simple. Like, is the stock going up or no? Or,
Right.
is the economy going up? Whereas in health, there's hundreds of outcomes, depending on what it is that you're trying to do, hundreds of disease states. So, you can have hundreds of models just in the oncology space, hundreds of models just in the infectious disease space, in various stages. So, um, similar. I think similar in terms of just the sheer complexity of it and our inability. I mean, our inability to really fully understand this and predict. I'm sure if the stock market was 100% predictable, we'd have, billionaires, just trillionaires, right? Just doing
Hmm.
that. So we haven't figured it out yet. Same thing with healthcare. We haven't figured it out, how to fully predict because it's so complex of a system.
What are what's the next big thing that you're working on? What's kind of the what's taking up a lot of your time now, whether it's in the analytics space, whether it's I know you only do about 20% on the infectious disease kind of physician side of things. What's the next big thing that you're working on that you're really excited and passionate about?
So I report into quite a few people, and one of them is our chief clinical officer, and a project that she's very interested in that I think has the potential to be very impactful is, I mean, she's noticed that, and I mean, these are national trends that we have had a decrease in life expectancy across the U.S. for a variety of reasons. Usually, um, diseases of despair, opiate abuse, there's gun violence, suicide, all these different things, um, loneliness, right? These are things that are very hard to turn around. And um, one of the things she's interested in doing, and North Shore Edward Elmhurst Health is committed in doing, is trying to figure out how do we impact health more broadly and think about not just the really distal, like we're going to help you with your knee replacement, or you have a cancer and we're going to help you with that, but thinking about health more proximally, which is not something that most healthcare organizations are really thinking about. So we're in the midst of figuring out kind of how to solve this problem of increasing lifespan, well span, decreasing disparities in both of these things in the communities we serve. And I think there's a component that's very basic. It's like, how do we make sure people aren't feeling lonely? How do we make sure they're eating
Hmm.
well and moving? These kinds of things. But then there's something to be said where our health system is a third of Illinois now, with all the recent mergers we've had. But how do we connect people to these types of interventions? And so there's probably a large digital analytics component as well that needs to feed something like this. So it's not like a small group of people that we're going to try to affect. This is a third of Illinois in different kind of settings. Some are urban, some are rural, suburban, all kinds of race, ethnicity, demographic characteristics, median
Hmm.
family income, all that. So how do we think that through? So it's in its very early stage, but I think it has the potential to be extremely impactful.
Is it fair to say I guess the brief synopsis of what this project sounds like it is to me is North Shore trying to be more proactive than reactive. Typically, healthcare is reactive to something happening. How do we fix it? Is being more proactive. What are the underlying issues that then lead to that event that we used to be reactive to? Is that fair?
Exactly. That is spot on. Well said.
Very nice. And my last point, as you were talking there, I just thought of an article I read a couple of weeks ago that traced back, and there wasn't a ton of deep research, clinical research into this yet. They're working on it, leading back to diseases, cancers, all of the ailments, I guess you could say, of people. The common denominator in a lot of those was inflammation. Is that a theory or a thought that you would agree with? That if we can solve
Yeah,
inflammation, that may solve a lot of ongoing things later in life.
I mean, I think inflammation is an issue. And I mean, there are a variety of anti-inflammatories, right?
Mhm.
Like steroids, ibuprofen, but these have side effects. So uh, there's probably some complexity to what inflammation is and what's causing it. So
Mhm.
it's a byproduct of some underlying process that
Okay.
probably needs
Yep.
to be addressed. But that process then creates a similar output of maybe inflammation. So inflammation can result in a heart attack. It can result in meningitis. It can result in, over time, some kind of cancer. But what is the etiology of that, right? Is
Mhm.
it something as basic as you have a viral infection that's caused inflammation that then results in whatever? Or is it like, I don't know, you have some kind of anatomic abnormality? You've been eating a lot of, I don't know, spicy food, or you've been taking
Yeah.
maybe some meds that have resulted in some kind of ulcer that is causing inflammation in the area around. I'm just coming up with it. So that might be kind of like a common denominator with multiple potential etiologies. And so, you frequently can't just treat it with the same, like treat the inflammation. You kind of have to figure out what's the cause of it.
Yeah, well said. Inflammation is not necessarily the starting place on the monopoly board, right? There's something that has, it's created the inflammation. I hadn't thought about it that way. As I was reading the article, I just remember thinking like, man, they're just now figuring this thing out. Like all we have to do is solve for inflammation, and we're going to solve for everything that comes thereafter. But you're right. It's there's something that is breeding the inflammation to start with, and that's the big thing. So, uh, Nirav, this has been a great conversation. I'm glad you came on. I hope you enjoyed
Yeah.
it as well. Let's try to get back together again for another episode before the next pandemic that hits us globally. Let's not wait for that. But where can people find you? The research that you guys are doing at North Shore, all the great things. Where can people check you out?
I mean, they can find me on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
So I'm Nirav Shah at North Shore Edward Elmhurst Health. There's hundreds of Nirav Shahs running around. And then you can also look up North Shore Edward Elmhurst Health.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. Hope you have a good rest of your week, and let's bump into each other soon.
Sounds good. Next time I'm in Iowa.
There you go. Which is all the time, right?
Yeah.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
Take
Thank you,
care.
Nate, for having me. Take
Yep.
care.
Hey, everyone. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to talk about the second opinion. As most of our listeners are physicians, you guys know the importance of having another medical professional's insight for a patient's treatment plan. But have you ever considered having a second opinion on your financial plan? Or have you simply trusted your financial advisor that they've already leveraged every strategy that your family needs to be 100% on track to meet your financial goals? That's why, for my Doctors and Dollars listeners, each Wednesday I block off 3 time slots, an hour each, to provide a free second opinion of their financial plan. During this hour, we'll reevaluate your financial goals and your risk tolerance. We'll ensure tax mitigation strategies are in place and ultimately give you confidence with your financial outlook, because that is what drives a happy home, a happy marriage, and peace of mind. These 3 spots each Wednesday do fill up fast. Send me an email at nate@grandvision.co or head over to www.grandvision.co/second opinion to fill out a quick form about you and schedule a time for us to meet. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope the rest of your week is abundant. Cheers.